For those of you who missed it, I am going to be starting to run a series of retro format tournaments through Limitless using TCGO, a series called Riley's Retro. Um, it's going to be, for the first tournament, it's going to be Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder format. So since some of the people in my Discord that I just made, which I can actually plug in a second, pull that up. But since some people have been mentioning that they don't know a lot about these formats, I wanted to go through and kind of like walk people through what decks are good in the format. I'm not American, so I don't know about that part. That's fair. I want to walk people through like what the format looks like, what decks are good, what cards are legal, stuff like that. So we're going to start off this stream with a quick little like tour of the 2019 Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder format. So if anyone here is interested in joining, I did just make a new Discord. This is my Riley's Retro Discord, so feel free to join that if you would like. I'm going to be posting all of my tournament updates, running all the tournaments out of there and everything, so go ahead and join that if you're interested. It also helps us kind of like vote on what formats people are interested in for the future. So it's a great place to be, just like hang out and talk to other retro deck enthusiasts. Love to play retro stuff, but don't have the cards on TCGO. So Del Cookie, I think the benefit really of playing a lot of these older formats on TCGO is that the cards are pretty affordable. They're pretty cheap. Obviously, trading for non-standard cards is totally up to you. Like, you don't have to if you don't want to. But if you are able to get them, most of the cards should be fairly cheap. Like, I know, like, because the Celebrations print of Lele exists and stuff like that, like, you should be able to find most of the cards fairly easily. And if not, you can always post. I'm going to try to, like, get, like, a trade market or something going, so if people have extras of cards, like, I'd be happy to look through my stuff and see what extras I have for people. So if you want to play, we'll definitely make it work for you. We are also talking about doing some webcam tournaments, so that's probably in the future, down the line a little bit, but I'd love to do some kind of like webcam tournaments too, so people can play proxy decks or older formats that aren't even on TCGO. I wanted to go through the Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder format, since I feel like a lot of people, a lot of newer players especially, weren't really familiar with, what cards were good, what decks were good and stuff like that. So also I wanted to mention too, I'm not sure if y'all knew about this feature. I'll just start it over from the beginning. But if you go to Limitless TCG.com, not the play version, this is like a whole separate version of their website. If you go to limitlesstcg.com and click tournaments, and then you go to this button here where it says edit tournament filter, make sure, where it says edit tournament filter, and you can get rid of that one, and you go to like, you can pick any of the different formats. So this will be good for anything in the Legacy era, anything that we're going to be running out of the Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder. You can select any of these filters, and it will bring up all the event results from that era. So we're going to go to 2018, 2019, apply selection. I think there are other options here, like formats too. Oh, this is even better. So we're going to do Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder, apply selection, and now we have all of the formats, or all the events that were in that format. Now, of course, these are just major events, so like League Cups and stuff like that won't show up here. But it's a really great place to get decklist ideas. With that in mind, we can just kind of go through some of these events. So again, for those of you who don't know, Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder was a 2018-2019 season format. It was, I think, November of 2018 to February of 2019 was when the format was played in Standard. It gave us a lot of really cool cards, a lot of really cool archetypes, and I think it's definitely one of the more celebrated. I mean, you look at this, like, this top 16, this top 32, there are, a fairly decent, diverse amount of decks here. But yeah, let's just hop right into one of these lists. So this card Alolan Ninetales GX with the Mysterious Guidance ability. This was definitely one of the more popular cards, like setup cards, specifically in this era, because when you evolve into it, you get to search for 2 item cards. So you see a lot of these like setup decks needing Rare Candy, Timer Ball. Yes, Timer Ball was played in Standard. Energy Lotto, like Max Potion, a lot of these like tech item cards or setup item cards that you could just search off Ninetales GX. And its attack was pretty decent too. Snowy Wind for 70, and then it does 30-20 your opponent's defense Pokemon, and the GX attack, Sublimation GX, being able to just knock out any opposing Ultra Beasts was really good, because Blacephalon was a very popular deck. Blacephalon to Ganondorf. So this was the Ultra Beast archetype. So let's go back to Jimmy's list here. You also had the option of Alolan Vulpix with Beacon in this format, which is really good too. This Solgaleo, I remember this being played in this deck specifically, and then later in the Worlds format with Mewtwo, the tag team. Because you could copy it out of the discard pile. Turbo Strike's a really, really strong attack, just being able to accelerate energy into play. Prominence GX, being able to heal all damage from all of your Pokemon. And your Pokemon in play have no weakness with its ability. And because you have a 1/0/1 line, it's kind of thin, but you do have the Ninetales to help you search out those rare candies. It actually wasn't terribly hard to get it out as long as you didn't prize any of the evolution pieces. So this was actually a very strong attacker, just getting energy into play. You already play the double colorless energy, and you have Max Potion, which synergizes really well. Excuse me. This deck really, really focused on being able to heal a lot of damage, and then also accelerate energy into play with Gardevoir GX, and being able to hit for a lot of damage while not getting knocked out in return, which is really, really strong. So this is kind of, one of the more, I feel like this deck itself wasn't actually, this build of it specifically wasn't hugely popular before this event, but afterward it was, I remember playing like 3 mirrors of this at League Cups that weekend, or the weekend after. Some other cards that were kind of the class of the format for anyone who's, joining this format for the first time. Professor Elm's Lecture was a really good setup card. You have a supporter that searches for 3 Pokemon with 60 HP or less, and you can put them into your hand. So that gets you Mudkip, it gets you Ralts, it gets you Vulpix, Cosmog, and Ditto. All really, really good cards you can search off of this. Cynthia was just your typical shuffle draw 6, but it was probably the strongest draw supporter we had in this format. Guzma, if you don't know what Guzma does, it is a boss plus switch, which is absurdly good on a supporter. This card was always very good when it was legal and standard. I think it's a very, very good card. Lily. So this is one thing that I think is going to be tough with playing on TCG Go, is that you have to do the pass mechanic to get past the no first turn supporters rule. And Lily, the reason it was so good was because you could Tapu Lele for it on your first turn, play Lily, and get that effect where you can draw to 8 cards in your hand, which on TCGO, after you pass your first turn away, you cannot do. But Lily was definitely played as usually like a 1 or a 2 of, depending on the deck, because you could search it very effectively off of Tapu Lele's Wonder Tag ability. A lot of this other stuff is pretty standard, things that you still see in today's format. Brooklet Hill was just a really good stadium. You could search for a basic water or fighting type Pokemon, put it right onto your bench, and both players can obviously use that effect, so it was very, very strong. Of course, we did have double colorless energy, which was just double turbo without the drawback of reducing your damage, so just strictly better. And then we had these Prism Star cards. So you cannot have more than 1 copy of a specific Prism Star card in your deck. So you can only play 1 Super Boost energy, but if you read that effect, while it's attached to a Stage 2 Pokemon, it provides every type of energy And if you have 3 or more stage 2 Pokemon in play, it provides every type of energy, but 4 at a time. So it counts as a quad rainbow energy while it's attached to a stage 2, and you have 3 or more stage 2 Pokemon in play, which is why it was really good with the Solgaleo, Swampert, Gardevoir deck, because you would have so many of these stage 2s in play that you could just slap down 4 energy at once. Really, really strong. A one of, but really, really good. And then speaking of Prism Stars, we had Ditto Prism Star, which was great to just smooth out some of these evolutions. So Ditto was able to evolve into any stage 1 Pokemon with its Almighty Evolution ability. It could effectively just be like a 4th Ralts, a 3rd Mudkip, a 3rd Vulpix. So it was just really good as like a flex spot that could turn into any of these stage 1s. You cannot rare candy it into something because Ditto doesn't actually, like, as its own Pokemon. But it was really, really good with a lot of these complicated stage 2 lines where you needed to get a Marshtomp or you need to get the Ninetales, something like that, the Kirlia. So Ditto was really good, and it is, of course, that Prism Star mechanic, so you can only have one in deck. One Ditto Prism Star in deck. So yeah, that's pretty much like this whole deck itself. We don't have to go through every different archetype, but to give you just kind of an idea of like what else was played, we had Blacephalon GX, Naganadel, which effectively just put a lot of energy in play with Naganadel, with that charging up ability, and then you would use Mind Blown, and you'd Lost Zone as many fire energy attached to your Pokemon as you want, and it would do 50 for each energy you put in the Lost Zone. So you just play a crap ton of fire energy, accelerate them with Naganadel, and then just blow stuff up with Blacephalon. It also had this useful Burst GX attack, which let you just discard one of your prizes, which is effectively taking it, you just put it to the discard instead of your hand. But if it was a fire energy, or excuse me, if an energy card, so Beast Energy would also work, you can attach it to one of your Pokemon instead of discarding it, which is really, really strong. It's unlikely, it doesn't happen a ton, but you do play 17 energy, so it could definitely happen. I think this is also the first time I've ever seen Sophocles and Sightseer played as cards. These were like very mid supporters for sure. And how can we talk about Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder without talking about this card? Beast Ring. So this is where we were talking about that the Ultra Beast mechanic. So Beast Ring, you can only play it if your opponent has exactly 3 or 4 prize cards remaining, and you search your deck for 2 basic energy and attach them to one of your Ultra Beasts. So this whole format was based around playing around the Beast Ring turn. If you could ever skip from 5 prizes to 2, or being able to mitigate it. So if your opponent is at 3 or 4 prizes, you want to end your opponents so that they don't get their Beast Rings, stuff like that. But yes, this format was very, very focused on kind of playing around that Beast Ring turn if you could, or mitigating the damage that Beast Ring would do to your board with your opponent pumping so much energy into play. So Beast Ring, huge part of this format. Another card that is a huge part of this format, much to everyone's dismay, is Shining Legends Marshadow with the Let Loose ability. So when you play it onto your bench from your hand, both players shuffle their hands into their deck and draw 4 cards. And you could use this on the first turn of the game. So a lot of people would just get let loose out of the game before they ever had a chance to play. They didn't have a turn, their opponent played let loose, and suddenly they're starting the game with 4 cards in hand plus a top deck. You got nothing, game's over. So a lot of this format was based around hoping you could draw out of Marshadow turn 1. So some people, I think rightfully so, this is not their favorite format because of Let Loose, but there's so much great to do while I do dishes. I'm happy, Fletcher. I'm happy I can help. So this was a great card to just include in a lot of decks, because it's good, external or extra draw support for yourself, but it's also disruption for your opponent. But there's also a lot of versatility in this format as well. Just with we'll look at all of the other archetypes you have here. Even in just this top 8 alone, you have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different archetypes. And I'm sure some of these are slightly different as well. Yeah, so another quickly, we'll go over some of these other archetypes. We had Lost March. This one specifically with the 3 Marshadow, I remember this being like a huge innovation. Lost March was one of those decks that like people kind of always thought it was like B tier at best. And I remember Charlie started this event 9-0 with this list. And the 3 Marshadow was a huge part of that, just being able to stick your opponent with a bad hand starting the game. And then you could go through and attack with this 1 prize Jumpluff, which has an attack that does 20 damage for each of your Pokemon except Prism Stars in the Lost Zone. So it's just a very fast, aggressive deck that disrupts a lot while also smacking for a lot of damage with 1 prizers, which is really good. I'm trying to think. This also had the Trumbeak, a lot of stuff that kind of like put itself into the Lost Zone, and a bunch of different attackers. So a lot like the Night March, if anyone's familiar with that. A lot like the old Night March decks, but with a little bit of a different twist there. I have to talk about one of my favorite archetypes of this format in Granbull. This was one of my favorite decks. Those of you who play Standard will recognize this as Arcanine. With the all-out attack, if you have no cards in your hand, it does 130 more damage for 1 Fairy Energy with a 30 base. So it would do 160 damage if you have no cards in hand. With cards like Choice Band, you could bump that up by 30, so you'd be hitting for 190. You also played Shrine of Punishment, which does 10 damage to each of your to each Pokemon GX and EX in play, yourself and your opponent, but this deck doesn't play any of those. So this was here for getting residual damage on things like Buzzwole GX, Blacephalon GX, being able to kind of just make those numbers a little bit easier to reach, especially Zoroark GX, which had 210 HP. 2 turns of Shrine of Punishment would knock it down to 190. So you could take it out with a Granbull. You had cards like Smoothover Magcargo. This was actually played a lot more later in the format with different like Buzzwole decks and stuff too. I remember seeing with like Acrobike and some really cool innovations with this. But you could just search your deck for a card, shuffle your deck, and then put the chosen card on top of it. With cards like Oranguru, with that Instructability, you can just draw immediately into them. Or you can keep them, keep the really good cards set for beginning of next turn. To make sure you can continue to smooth along your attacks with that all-out attack. This deck was really, really sequencing heavy, decision-making heavy and focused. Again, to make sure you're manipulating your hand so you have no cards in it, but you still want to be able to have a follow-up for the next turn. So if anyone here has played Arcanine, it's pretty much the same kind of concept style of deck. This plays a lot of cards that we didn't see in any other deck, like Apricorn Maker, Diantha, like a lot of these cards that were just very, very unique to this deck. Bodybuilding Dumbbells, I think Tord played a version of this deck with this as well. So just a lot of like really interesting cards that were focused on just being able to immediately get played. We also had cards like, where did I just see, like Field Blower, which lets you choose up to any combination, two cards in any combination of tools or stadium cards and discard them. This was a long time coming for people who were scared of Breakpoint Garbodor with the Garbotoxin ability, which had rotated at this point, but Field Blower was still a very, very important, impactful card. For getting rid of tools, getting rid of those stadiums that were very annoying for this deck to deal with. And you can also just play it out of your hand most times, even to get rid of your own cards. But Granbull was for sure one of my favorite decks from this format, if not my favorite. Just like it felt really fun. It was fun to play. You're constantly manipulating your deck in your hand so that you can actually continue to attack. And it was just a very strong, like, 1 prize deck. We also had these lovely stall decks, which played the Steelix. And you're looking at this and you're like, this card sucks. It's terrible. But it does have 190 HP on a single prize Pokemon. And you also played Metal Frying Pan, which reduces the damage it takes by 30, and it has no weakness. So you would basically just stick a big Steelix in the active, or a Hoopa with Scoundrel Guard so it can't be damaged by GX or EX Pokemon. You'd stick something like that in the active, and then you would effectively just disrupt your opponent out of the game. You'd play Enhanced Hammers, you'd play Crushing Hammers, Counter Catcher, all those lovely stall cards, Plumeria, Acerola, all of these cards that you would either heal your own Pokemon, mill your opponent out somehow, and you would just, this was like a stall deck. And I remember this, especially after this event, the Steelix became like hugely popular in other decks, and I think it was eventually replaced by Regigigas. Yeah, a lot of people like loved that version of Stall. I never played it. I have enjoyed Stall decks historically, but for some reason that one, that one just never really never really appealed to me. But if you are playing in a Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder tournament in Riley's Retro, make sure you know how to play around some iteration of the Stall matchup. There are lots of different things this kind of deck can throw at you, so it's definitely beneficial to be aware of the basic list or the basic concept. So a lot of these other decks, we had some Buzzwole decks. This was one of the more popular archetypes as well. I believe it was Alex Szymanski played one of the first versions of this deck with unit energies, which basically was just a fighting or a fairy type energy, so you could actually attack with Alolan Ninetales. But your main attacker was Buzzwole GX with that Jet Punch attack for 1 fighting. It just does 30 to the active, 30 to a bench Pokemon. It also has Knuckle Impact for 160, and it cannot attack during the next turn, or Absorption GX, 40 damage for each of your remaining prize cards. So you could Absorption GX early, while you still have a bunch of prizes left, and then Knuckle Impact the turn after, stuff like that. But you'll also notice this is an Ultra Beast Pokemon, so you get to use Beast Ring, which is where this Alolan Ninetales comes into play, because you can just search straight for 2 Beast Rings if you want, or a Choice Band and a Beast Ring, things like that. This deck was very, very efficient at maximizing those Beast Ring turns. And speaking of the prizes and how important, being at 3 prizes, 4 prizes were, how relevant that was, this Buzzwole with the Sledgehammer attack, if your opponent has exactly 4 prize cards remaining, it does 90 more damage for a single fighting with 30 base. So that's 120 damage if your opponent is at 4 prizes. You would have to play around the Beast Ring turn, but also the Sledgehammer turn. So you could choose to go from 5 to 3, play around Sledgehammer, but then you're in Beast Ring territory. So this format in particular was very, very focused on prize manipulation, being aware of how many prizes you and your opponent have, and how you can get punished for that. Would timer be an issue playing with or against Stall in this format? Yes, I would say yes. There will be a timer. These are going to be just normal timed matches. So if you're playing the deck, definitely make sure you're practicing with it. And if you're playing against it, timer will definitely be a factor. So be aware of that when choosing the deck. So fun, I've never played a fun Buzzrock Tails with an Electro GX to pull energy against Stall. So that's a good thing too, because it also activates Sledgehammer and Beast Ring. So if you Electro GX knocks itself out, and then puts energy in play from the discard pile. So you could actually activate your own Sledgehammer and Beast Ring while also getting energy back against Stall. So yeah, the fact that he played an Electro GX line in there shows you how impactful Stall was. And this was actually what I was looking for. Regigigas Stall. Same concept as the other Stalls. However, you used Regigigas, which was a basic Pokemon with 180 HP, a single prizer as well. And you also had Unknown Hand. So again, for those of you who don't know this format, this card became very, very crucial a little bit later in the format. So it has an ability that if it's in the active spot and you have 35 or more cards in your hand, you win the game. You just say, I win. So this deck, again, where it's stalling you, you would effectively just keep drawing cards using Steven's Resolve to search for any 3 cards you want. And your opponent's not actively winning the game, so eventually you have 35 cards or more in hand. You get the unknown into the active, and you just announce hand and win the game. So this was a very, very popular deck. Again, a little bit later in the format than this first. I think this was the first U.S. regional that Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder was legal in. But this unowned hand Regigigas style deck became hugely popular later in the format. And unowned hand, yes, I've seen it pulled off many a time at League Cups for sure. And here's that Shuckle GX I was referencing that I lost to our good old friend Frank, playing with that Protective Shell ability, so it can't be damaged by Pokemon who have energy attached that is less than 2. So Granbull attacking for 1 energy meant, or 2 or fewer, excuse me. Granbull only having 1 energy attached means I have to have 3 energy attached to attack this Shuckle. It was just horrible. Could not beat it. We did have this deck for a little while. The Rayquaza GX that did 30 more damage for each type of basic lightning and basic grass energy attached to all your Pokemon. And the Vikavolt was strong charge that just put an energy, a lightning and a grass energy into play from your deck once a turn. This deck was very, very popular in the format before this. It was right after Worlds. I think it was just after rotation. This deck was like the class of the format for sure. Because you would just be able to pump energy and play with Vikavolt, swing for knockouts with Rayquaza. Very, very aggressive deck. I don't remember this being played too much in Sun and Moon to Lost Thunder, but it was definitely a deck that was legal and definitely saw play. Zoroark Gyarados. So again, for people who are new to the format, Zoroark GX was a ridiculously broken card. It had a trade ability, discard a card and draw 2 cards from your deck, and then an attack for a single attachment in that double colorless attack that just does 20 for each Pokemon in play. It was an incredible consistency engine because you could just draw a bunch of cards while also thinning your deck. And you only needed to play double colorless energy to attack with it. So you could just attach a single energy attachment to get that to fulfill the cost of the double colorless. And then you just put a bunch of Pokemon in play, and you have a 210 HP stage 1 Pokemon swinging for 120, 150 damage. This also played Professor Kukui, so you could bump that damage up to 170, which was, again, incredibly strong, and it was just such a strong consistency engine at the time, too. This deck also, I don't remember this ever being played beforehand, but Philip Schultz just won this event with this Gyarados. This Gyarados from Burning Shadows with the Venting Anger. For a double colorless attachment, it does 50 damage for each Magikarp in your discard pile. So you could actually, with Ditto, if you evolve the Ditto into a Gyarados, you could get all 4 of your Magikarp into the discard pile. And you could attack for 200 damage. You could attack for 230 with the Choice Band, or even 250 with Professor Kukui. So you could just do so much damage out of nowhere. And this deck also played 3 copies of Enhanced Hammer, played Max Potion, a lot of cards that were a Judge as well, cards that were a lot more disruptive. This was very much a deck made for the Zoroark mirror. And being able to beat those mirror matchups for sure. And this was a very, very strong deck for like this one particular regional towards the end of the format. And I remember playing a couple of people at League Cups the same weekend. I think it was there were League Cups like the day of this event, and someone had this list that like the same day. Very, very cool deck. There's a Zoroark Weavile deck. Again, just playing the same old trusty Zoroark GX engine with the Ultra Prism Weavile that did 50 damage for each evolution Pokemon your opponent had in play for 1 dark energy. So a lot of this format was just, it's kind of like Arceus formats now where you're just like, I'm going to take a 4/4 Zoroark and slap anything else in there, and it'll be good. and this Weavile was the choice for this event. A very, very strong card. I remember, I think it was Sam Chen when Ultra Prism first dropped, played a deck, this Zoroark Weavile deck. Very, very strong. Because your opponent has to play around that Evil Admonition, especially in the Zoroark Mirror, where if your opponent plays down, 3 Zoroarks and a Tapu Lele, well, that's 200 damage, and you can knock out an opposing Zoroark with a Choice Band. So really, really strong single prize attacker for 1 energy attachment. Anything that you can fit into a Zoroark deck was popular. Zoroark was just absurdly good for the entirety of its legality. So if you are playing in this format, make sure to pick up a 4/4 Zoroark line if you don't already have one. They should be really cheap, but pick them up if you don't have them yet. Let's see. There's also Malamar. There were some different variants of Malamar decks throughout this entire format. But they all focused on, of course, strong psychic type attackers, and this Marshadow GX, which was basically just a fighting type that could copy any of your basic Pokemon in the discard pile and hit for fighting type weakness to be able to take out Zoroark. And then, of course, Malamar was the whole core of the deck, being able to just accelerate psychic energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So you just put energy in play with Malamar onto different attackers like Giratina, Lunala, Prism Star, or you also had the Dawnwings Necrozma and the Necrozma GX. And I remember this Chimecho being a big new innovation with that Bell of Silence attack where it does 10 damage, and your opponent can't play any Pokemon that have abilities from their hand during their next turn. So if you're playing against Zoroark, you Bell of Silence, they can't evolve into their Zoroarks. And you get so much time to set up and evolve your Pokemon. Eventually they can knock it out with like Ram on Zorua or Energy Drive on Lele or things like that, but you'd get so much time being able to just Bell of Silence them out of the game that it was very, very strong. There's also this great item card called Spell Tag. When the psychic Pokemon it's attached to is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, so you get to put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon however you like. So you could set up some really cool numbers, set up some really cheeky knockouts and things like that. Very, very cool card. I wanted to just kind of go over the format, how to get the information on it by going to limitlesstcg.com and then using the tournament filters to kind of just look through all of the popular decks of the format just to give people an idea. So when we are playing in any of the Riley's Retro events, you do have this to pull from. Yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. I'll try to make some of these resources available in my Discord as well. I'll pin this link for people as well.